俺が切り開く。繋いでく。
When I started making videos about the SaGa series, the closest to what you could call a revival was a mobile port of Romancing Saga 2. Eventually, this version would come to other platforms, kicking off this franchise revival that we're enjoying now. All these years later, we're finally at the first SaGa release that isn't a remaster or remake of any kind. Not only that, but it released alongside the original Japanese release. Things have definitely changed these past few years. So is SaGa Emerald Beyond the true revival that we've been hoping for? Well, we'll see. SaGa Emerald Beyond, like the name suggests, is a follow-up to Scarlet Grace. The visuals and battle system are incredibly similar at a glance, but just like with the old Romancing Saga entries on the Super Nintendo, the game still largely differs from its predecessors in a lot of ways instead of just being a save repeat. This time, we have 5 protagonists, each with their own thing that makes them special, so let's take a quick look at them before moving on. First off, we have Ameya, a witch hiding in Miyako City, which is basically just real-life Kyoto. Just as Ameya's witch trials are about to start, she bumps into a stranger and loses all her powers. So now she has to manage her time between being an ordinary schoolgirl, gathering cats to restore her powers, and gaining mana to pass her witch exams. It's close to the typical magical girl coming-of-age story, doing her best to grow up with her newfound responsibilities and changing identity. According to Kawazu, she's the perfect starting character for new players, in part due to her playthrough cutting off early in your first session, keeping you well out of harm's way on your first playthrough, so you don't need to worry about long-term builds without knowing how anything works. Besides that, the cat hunt also massively raises her int stat and gives her equipment letting you learn new spells, so you can hugely overwhelm the enemies with extremely powerful magic. I'm not sure if I really agree with her being ideal for new players though, since that early ending comes really early. The Nintendo Switch demo is very close to a full playthrough for her, and I think it could leave some people feeling extremely underwhelmed by the whole thing. I know I was, since I started as her. And getting a full playthrough with a true ending out of her has you going through an absurd amount of hoops, including playthroughs with other characters, with no in-game indication that you're doing any of the right things besides just getting the bad ending again. It is just very frustrating if this is the first character that you're playing as and you don't know that this is how this works. Next is Tsunamori Mido, a Miyako City native. Ever since he was a child, he was groomed to seek out his destiny to save the world, being able to see the guiding threads of the game's HUD to lead him where he needs to be. If anyone in this game could be considered a protagonist, it's him. He even says this when you choose him. So he sets out on this journey to follow the threads of destiny just to get it over with and move on with his life, since he does have a choice to follow their guidance or not. I actually quite like him, but much like Ameya, his journey also gets cut short fairly early on. But at least that first route is somewhat fulfilling, and it's not that hard to get him to a proper ending. Mido gets an army of puppets under his control, each being able to copy over his move, making them their own. Alongside stuffing them with additional souls to further give them new abilities. It's an interesting gimmick, but it does feel like that hamstrings these characters when you're not playing as him, since they can appear as recruitables for others too, just without their main mechanic present. Bonnie and Fermina are a good cop, bad cop duo. You could call them a dirty pair if you want. They find a triangle and then decide they should seek out more triangles because it might relate to the President of the United States. Yeah, that's kind of the extent of their entire story and characters.
Fermina, あんた彼氏いるの?
私は真面目に。
ここには盗聴器とかいろいろあるはずだ。私らは監視されてるんだ。そのつもりで会話しろ。
え、そんなこと急に言われても。
They're supposed to be a bit like Gray or Leo, where you have absolute freedom, being able to go to all the worlds as you see fit. They're also dual protagonists, but in the end, this doesn't feel all that special in this game. You tend to end up with a fairly static party quite fast in my experience, so 2 slots being filled by strong characters doesn't really change anything all that much. Diva is a robot singer who uncovered a song she shouldn't have, so her databanks get erased to keep this song under wraps. With no memory or purpose, Diva sets out on a journey to find her heart, or figure out what that even means. She also keeps body hopping as she no longer needs her original vessel anymore, giving her major changes in appearance and power.
私の形式番号は D05723114 通称ディーバナンバー5歌姫。
よし、自己紹介も終わったし、早速出発しよ
う。The Dismal Lord, Cygnus, an immortal vampire ruling over Yomi, a world that is essentially hell, has found himself killed. Reawakening in a different world, he's summoned as a champion to fight in an eternal conflict. However, he doesn't feel like doing this, so he just decides to set off and go explore other worlds instead. Taking with him the band of warriors he was assigned to, slowly corrupting them and making them his thralls while trying to regain his full power. Easily the most interesting and entertaining character of the bunch. His vampire gimmick makes it so that he has a large cast of characters to interact with, alongside giving him a much stronger sense of purpose in the larger number of worlds that he goes to. After corrupting his party members, they can swear fealty to him, giving him extra life points to spend on abilities, and giving them the ability to draw extra power from special equipment. It is a really sick mechanic.
鉄人よ、汝を我が眷属に迎えよう。我が眼差しは常に汝に注がれる。汝の血は我が一部となり、我を闇の王たらしめる。とこしえに共にあらんことを。
And that's the cast. In the end, outside of certain characters having early cutoff points, they generally don't feel like they changed the game all that much. It's not like Scarlet Grace, where there's 3 major formats across 4 main characters. Everyone eventually finds their way to the crossroads that leads to other worlds, and once you're in a world, you do that world's one quest before moving on. There's no exploration or storyline here. You can't really stumble into a crazy quest hidden somewhere in a corner. You have short, linear, singular quests per world. This format also means that although Bonnie and Formita are intended to be somewhat free, they're actually just as on rails as everyone else is, so their story potential was sacrificed for, nothing. The reason everyone is traveling to these worlds differs, but in the end, that also doesn't really matter. They'll get what they're looking for at the end of the static quest, whether it's a triangle or a cat, it all plays out the same way. Quests can also diverge a bit in writing, but since nothing overlaps and nothing feels truly missable in this game, it all comes down to the exact same thing. As for overarching story or theme, is there one? Because if there is, I can't find it. At most, there's a lot to do about cyclic events and traditions, where quite often similar things have played out before, often with other heroes from other worlds coming in as a catalyst to these events. But even that angle is not very consistent. In the end, most of the game is an irreverent episodic romp, plowing through these scenarios, finding new allies along the way, as well as encountering monsters. So let's talk about the real meat of this game, combat. The combat in Emerald Beyond is extremely good. One thing that I've been hoping for since I played Scarlet Grace was a game that would build on its foundation and try new things with it, and here we are, we got exactly that. So, much like Scarlet Grace, all the characters are spread across the timeline, deciding their turn order. It's a full turn system, so you select everyone's action before allowing the turn to play out. Each move has a different movement speed associated with it, letting you further position where everyone is on the timeline. Moves still cost BP, and BP is still shared across the party, making you really weigh down your options, not just in what moves everyone does, but in a lot of cases also who gets to make a move and who stays put and defends. And from here, things diverge from Scarlet Grace quite a lot. For one, in Scarlet Grace, the timeline positions were basically just a turn order. In Emerald Beyond, there's a larger range of positions that everyone is spaced between, meaning there are now empty spaces on the field. So timeline manipulation is no longer just about swapping characters around, it's about controlling larger amounts of space. United attacks are no longer an effect that happens because two characters of the same team lined up together after someone in between them got eliminated. They now simply happen by having characters right next to each other. So pretty much every turn, combos are going to be happening all the time, from both you and the enemies. If a combo's rating gets high enough, it has the chance to go into overdrive. Overdrives basically give characters in the combo a free do-over on their combo, further upping the damage dealt. There's also showstoppers, the exact opposite of a united attack. If a character has two free spaces on both sides, there's a chance they combo into their own moves, dealing absurd amounts of damage for practically free in the process. This usually comes into play during tough boss fights when you're extremely close to getting your party wiped, since the battlefield is usually barren during those moments. And you best pray it's your last character who gets a showstopper off in those moments, because if they don't, it's usually the boss who will get a free slam dunk on you this way. This is why timeline manipulation is so important in Emerald Beyond, and the game gives you plenty of ways to either space enemies out to prevent combos, or to stick someone to an enemy to prevent them from show-stopping you. Beyond moves that just move you around the timeline, there's a lot of interrupts, counters, and pursuits that can go off in response to enemy actions that stick your characters in one place or another. A great way to either stop or break off a combo as it starts, or prevent a showstopper. It's very easy to focus too much on building your own combos or forget that you just left an enemy alone in his own corner of the timeline. Or maybe even worse feeling, when you get an overdrive combo going off in a way that actually just screws you over. Overdrive combos use random moves, so it's entirely possible that you get a timeline manipulation move that shoves an enemy in between your comboing characters, breaking off the combo in the process, taking away any benefits that you would have gotten from them having been in a combo. Races are finally back after a long absence in the series. Most people will probably think of Frontier with this, but these are a staple from the original Game Boy Saga titles. So this time, alongside humans, we've got robots, monsters, plants, and Kugutsu. Robots don't have their stats increase over time, instead raising their stats and gaining new moves based on equipment they've got equipped. Monsters, and cats, which are basically the same thing both in game and in real life, can absorb moves from enemies they've dealt the finishing blow to. Moves can be unleashed, basically supercharging them once before erasing them from your move list, so you can use that to cycle through moves over time. Plants are constantly going through a cycle of death and rebirth, maturing as you use them, which increases their power while withering away their life points. In their final stage, they'll have one life point, and letting them die at that point lets them be reborn, lowering their stats but increasing their growth potential for the next cycle. Kugutsu are these weird ninja puppet things who can copy Mido's text if they see him use them, rather than learning their own abilities. Otherwise, they're kinda just humans who can equip only one weapon instead of two, and can't learn skills on their own. In the end, while all of these options are interesting to toy around with, they're all pretty much just inferior to human party members in every way due to their restrictions, especially in the late game and in high battle rank New Game Plus. They're not useless or anything, but they definitely feel like they drop off in a game that wants very long-term scaling. On top of all of this, you get your typical fun status effects: lowering defenses and attack, paralyze, stun, stench, confusion. Stench is a funny one. Nobody wants to combo with someone who smells bad, so anyone who is affected by this cannot do a united attack. Confusion, on the other hand. Maybe this game has the absolute worst feeling confusion effect of any game of all time. Not only does it make the afflicted character do random moves every turn, those random moves still cost BP. Also, all their moves go off as interrupts on your own team, so they're acting out of turn, taking away resources from you, and they're getting in the way of your controlled characters, breaking off any combo potential you might have had going. It's a terrible situation. Speaking of terrible situations, let's talk about trading. So, Emerald Beyond doesn't have any shops, and the resources you get from fighting encounters is fairly limited. With how aggressive combat rank scaling in this game works, the only way to get ahead is getting better equipment, and you'll mainly do that through crafting. And the materials for crafting are largely gained through trading. Now, on its own, that doesn't sound too bad, if everything about trading wasn't the worst that it could possibly be. The menus to engage with the system are sluggish, the rate at which you move forward with the items you want is glacial, and the results are random. Not only that, but the game wants you to engage with this between every single fight. It is so much busy work for so little gain, so much so that I thought that I was missing some sort of automation options here or something, but no, it really wants you to sit here and check back to see if you can finally get all those items you've been trying to get your hands on between every fight. If this wasn't bad enough, the crafting menu itself is even worse. They really expect you to scroll through a massive list of all the items that you have to find the things you want to upgrade. The only sorting options you have are to see the items currently equipped by your party members. But even with this enabled, you can't see who has these items equipped at a glance. It used to be even worse somehow. They wouldn't even show you which items could currently be equipped or not until you selected them, so you had to check each and every item individually just to make sure if you could actually advance something or not. Thankfully, they did add an icon for that in an early patch, so you can actually see if you can upgrade something at a glance. But items still have multiple paths, and you still can't see if a new one has opened up at a glance, so you still have to open up a menu to see if something that you're holding out for has opened up or not. This doesn't sound too bad at first, but every equipment slot is upgradable across your entire party, so that's a lot of menuing to check what can and cannot be advanced at very frequent intervals. It is not great. The lack of sorting options and how little information is available at a glance really does not feel acceptable to me at all, and it's been one of my biggest frustrations with Emerald Beyond in general, since, again, this is the main way you're going to grow your party's power, and it kinda just flat out sucks. And the main reason that this is the only real way that you grow your party is because of the way that battle rank is handled in Emerald Beyond. Dynamic scaling for enemies is the backbone of the SaGa series, so it being there shouldn't come as a surprise. As you grow stronger, the enemies grow stronger, so you stay ahead by using your know-how of the systems and an understanding of what builds to go for. This is perfectly fine. The issue here is that everything scales infinitely, including the bosses. In most other entries, the bosses tend to be static in power, intending to gate you off from clearing certain content until you're strong enough to overcome it. Often with some time limits in place, so you want to do those quests within a certain time frame. So everything you're doing feels like it's building to these milestone moments that you have to clear. But in Emerald Beyond, everything scales, including the bosses. Since there's no accounting for when you can hit these areas, when you can fight these bosses, and that feels kind of odd, honestly. Romancing Saga 2 gave you a ton of freedom in the order that you fight the 7 heroes in, with multiple levels of static power based on how late into your playthrough you face them, often even changing the circumstances that you encounter them in. Minstrel Song, certain harder quests and fights aren't available if you don't do them early enough, leaving the more demanding quests with harder fights for people who know the systems well enough to find their way to this challenging content early enough. All of this is optional, you can go where you want, whenever you want. Emerald Beyond is extremely linear, and it still struggles more with balancing content in interesting ways than the rest of the series, making it all feel flat start to finish. So the way that Emerald Beyond is structured is that you do a world's quest, make your way to the conjoined worlds, choose a new world to go to, and then do that world's quest. Rinse and repeat. A lot of this is obviously a throwback to Game Boy era Saga, specifically Saga 2, where you travel from world to world and just find these strange and wonderful worlds where all this sort of crazy stuff is going on. The issue with this is that instead of, say, Minstrel Song, where you can choose to do content or not, or even Scarlet Grace, where you have fairly involved narratives and a large structural and tonal changes between all characters, you basically have a set number of filler quests to do, and those filler quests are the main meat of the game. There's no overarching setting or story to any of this, unlike Saga 2. Your characters aren't going to learn or reflect on anything that happens. You do minor quests and then go off to the next one. And that's fine, in moderation. But when it's the entire playthrough in a game that really pushes New Game Plus enough to put counters as to how many times you've cleared the game as each character, that really makes a lot of these worlds feel more like a chore where you're going through the motions to get it over with. Especially when redoing these areas as different characters doesn't really change anything about them all that much. They're just stock quests that always play out this way, and none of them are related to each other. The character writing is actually great in a lot of this game, though moment-to-moment writing is very charming for each character, each scene. Okay, maybe not so much for Bonnie and for Mina. But I had a blast with unique dialogue moments from Mido, Amea, Diva, but especially Cygnius. Every character has a screw loose in this game and it's great. The issue is that there's no real scenario going on for most of the game. There's no setting, no real hook. Cygnius is the closest the game gets to one of these, with a large number of the worlds tying directly to the loyalty of his followers. He very often has these quests play out quite differently from other characters, but still not in a way that makes it feel like these areas are being fleshed out in any way. Still, it's better than nothing. Also, you cannot skip forward through any of the dialogue, which would have been nice with how much repetition you're bound to face playing through the game again as other characters. Yes, I know what is going on with these Delta-based research groups. I've been here 5 times now. Please let me get this over with. And I know it sounds petty, but when you double that with the trading and crafting menus taking forever to deal with, you get a game that starts feeling like a massive chore with some really fun combat lightly peppered throughout it. And even that combat feels like it's missing a larger picture, since it's not really going anywhere due to how they used enemy scaling in this game. What is actually really petty is how done I was with the tutorial pop-ups the game constantly has on the screen. You can't perform any action at all without the game giving you a tutorial pop-up about it. Oh, you opened your quest list? Here's a tutorial pop-up telling you about this feature. You did a united attack? Pop-up. A stat went up? Pop-up. For some reason, these cannot be turned off, and it feels weirdly insulting to still be getting these when you're on your 4th or 5th playthrough. What's even stranger is that these are not full tutorial pop-ups either. They're reminders that there is a tutorial section in the game where you can look up information about these functions by going to their respective pages. It's kind of bizarre, honestly. In the meantime, the game doesn't really explain that block percentage isn't a rate of how frequently damage gets blocked, but the percentage of how much damage gets blocked, and that the direction arrow means from which side of the timeline you're blocking incoming damage of. You know, actual useful information. After how phenomenal Scarlet Grace handled its tutorial archive, it's kind of shocking how much of a step back this is. And that's kind of how I feel about Emerald Beyond in a lot of ways. It improved on the core battle system, but at the cost of literally everything else. I was intending to do more playthroughs of this game, but with the few I've done, I think I've seen enough of the game to know that my mind isn't really going to change anymore. So, do I recommend SaGa Emerald Beyond? If you're a massive SaGa fan, you've probably already bought this game on day one and have likely finished it more times than I have by now, and if not, then no, not really. Get something with more meat to it, like Scarlet Grace or Minstrel Song. Maybe even Romancing Saga 2 or 3. If you're still eyeing this, then maybe get it during a very steep sale. As much as it pains me to say this, because of all the SaGa releases up to this point, this is the first real new one. This is also the one recent SaGa release that I cannot recommend. If you do get it, make sure it's at a steep sale, maybe a year from now after they further patch this game up. Hopefully the UI will have improved by then. As always, this video has been brought to you by the people supporting the channel on Patreon and YouTube channel members. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like this in the future, maybe head over to Patreon or become a YouTube member. Or if you're new, maybe stick around and subscribe. Anyway, this was AboveUp, and I will see ya.